Were you expecting Diane Abbott to get kicked out of the Labour Party for being a racist?
I was hoping.
But who saw it coming?
Any punishment of Diane Abbott is a pro as far as I'm concerned.
So, okay, just to start, I don't hate or dislike Diane Abbott, actually. I see her as a kind of weird relic of a past era.
I want her in the public eye just because it's funnier that way.
Yeah, I mean, none of the other MPs are going to wear two left shoes in public. Like, none of the other MPs are going to, fail to count they can't count. And
when I tell all of my friends about these incidents that she's had over the years, they don't believe me until I bring up the pictures.
There is a genuine cavalcade of hilarity actually with Diane Abbott, and so I assume that she'd be because she's getting on a bit, and she's been doing Labour politics for literally longer than I've been alive, and so I assumed that she was going to be in the Labour Party forever. And so on St George's Day yesterday, she was kicked out of the Labour Party for being a racist.
Happy St. George's Day, fellas.
Yeah, but by a white man, because she insulted other whites. And it's just like, what?
Is Labour trying to win back the red meat vote?
That's precisely what they're trying to do.
Seems to be.
I think Keir Starmer is going full Stalin in this. He's like, you know what? I've had enough of this radical left-wing nonsense that's obviously going to lose us votes. And
he's going full Mao. He's going, I'm a rightist now. It's all of these leftists in the party have ruined everything.
Yeah, that's actually it. And I think it's under the advice of Tony Blair as well that he's doing.
Almost certainly.
Yeah, but it's just, I mean, who saw it coming? Diane Abbott getting kicked out of the Labour Party for racism, right? So this is how it began. In fact, before we go on, right, so go and support us. Sign up, watch Critical Race Theory Explained, and help us keep the lights on, because obviously we've been demonetized. Because I've done a lot of work on Critical Race Theory, and this is rather upending the apple cart, actually, when it comes to critical race theory, because, of course, what we've got here now is that Diane Abbott, a black woman, has essentially racially oppressed Jews and gypsies, and therefore she has been disciplined by being kicked out of the Labour Party, because that's too racist for the Labour Party. So now you can be racist to white people, or at least certain strains of white people.
We already knew that.
Right? Well, yeah, but not in the critical race theory framework. That's an impossibility. I mean, you've heard over and over, you can't be racist to white people. You can't be racist to white people. Right?
So you can be racist to white people?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so, the fact that this has now had dramatic career-changing consequences for Diane Abbott is interesting, at the very least, right? So The Guardian published this article because a report came out of St Andrews, Manchester, and King's College London, the universities, that was published in a book called Racism and Inequality, Ethnic Inequality in a Time of Crisis. It's always a crisis. Always. Every day is a crisis for the left. But this then was featured in an article by Tomiwa Owolande. Don't know who that is.
Owolade?
I can't pronounce it. But he says, racism in Britain is not a black and white issue. It's far more complicated. A report on ethnic inequality reveals that Irish, Jewish, and traveller people are the most abused, the most racist. The people who have the most racist abuse thrown at them are not people of colour in Britain.
Well, once again, this is getting down into, if you're going to talk about intersectional, instead of racial lines, let's break it down even further into ethnic lines, and that's where this is going. That is exactly where this is going. And somehow this bear trap closed on Diane Abbott, which, and again, I don't dislike Diane Abbott. I actually think she might well be a nice person as well to talk to, just some sort of grandmotherly figure. Maybe, I don't know. I don't think she's a bad person or anything. I just think she's not terribly bright. And she's swimming in waters that are full of sharks, and she's not a shark. No, she's never given me that impression. No, exactly, right? And some people do give me that impression, but Diane Abbott never gave me that impression. So I always saw her as a bit of a buffoon, right? Just to amuse me when I'm reading about politics. But anyway, so Nissa Finney is a professor of human geography at St Andrews and led the report. She argues that the UK is immeasurably far from being a racially just society. Oh, God. Well, I mean, that's made my day better. The kinds of inequality we see in our study would not be there if we had a really just society. It's like, okay, fine. We don't, from a progressive point of view, have a just society. And I'm okay with that. The two groups most likely to say they have experienced racist abuse, according to the survey, are gypsies and Jewish people. 60% of gypsies and traveller people report they experienced some form of racial assault. More than 55% of Jewish people said the same. Overall, in other groups, it was only 30%.
So, of course, they were like, well, what are you saying? 2/3 of the non-English people in England aren't being racially abused.
I mean, we've covered this sort of stuff before when the Jimmy Carr Gypsy and Traveller joke came out last year. The problem with any sympathy I might have for Gypsy and Travellers is that I have had to interact with them in the past.
Yeah, but everyone feels that way because everyone's had to deal with them.
Any European person will tell you that you go past the Gypsy caravan park and it's maybe a 50-50 that they'll throw something at you or steal something off of you.
Yeah.
Whereas with the Jewish people, well, my question there is, who is it that's throwing the abuse at them?
Well, that's a great question. They don't answer that in this
article. Of course they don't. Of course they don't.
But he does say, this means that white Irish people are more likely to say they've experienced prejudice in Britain than black African people and all Asian ethnic groups. Now, the significance of this, I don't think can be overstated because, of course, this totally upends the very narrative of racial inequality and harmony in the United Kingdom, right? If actually it's the bloody Irish that are getting it the worst, the Gypsies and the Jews, then, well, where exactly does Diane Abbott fit into this? Because actually, the black people, especially Africans, actually registered a surprisingly low amount of racial abuse in the UK. So, like, what's Diane Abbott's entire career been about? If the real victims are actually mostly white.
Well, it's probably about Gibbs.
Sure.
That's what most of these grifters are.
Well, again, I don't think Diane Abbott's a grifter. That would imply a level of self-awareness I don't think Diane Abbott possesses.
I don't think you need that much self-awareness to be able to say, I want more things given to me by the government.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily grifting. That's Gibbs, though. But okay. Anyway, so Diane Abbott wrote a letter in response to this to the Guardian. And this is fascinating. Tamiwa Owoladi claims that Irish, Jewish, and traveller people all suffer from, quote, racism. Racism in Britain is not, he quotes the article. They undoubtedly experience prejudice. This is similar to racism, and the two words are often used as if they're interchangeable. It is true that many types of white people with points of difference, such as redheads, can experience this prejudice.
Are we going on about ginger oppression now?
Yes, that's actually where we've arrived at. Diane Abbott,
is champion of
gypsies,
gingers.
The Jews and the gingers. Basically the same. But they are not their lives subject to racism. In pre-civil rights America, okay, hang on a sec, Diane, we were talking about Britain, and suddenly you've gone 200 years in the past and 10,000 miles away.
all of English history has to be reframed from the American perspective.
Yeah. But in pre-civil rights America, Irish people, Jewish people, and travellers were not required to sit at the back of the bus. Oh, yeah, because the Irish were just treated brilliantly 200 years ago, 10,000 miles away. But it gets worse. I mean, like 10,000 miles isn't quite far enough. Let's go about 20,000 miles to apartheid South Africa, another place that Diane Abbott didn't go to. But these groups were allowed to vote, and at the height of slavery, there were no white-seeming people manacled on the slave ships. Does she not know about the Irish?
Well, does she
indentured servitude?
Does she not know about the global slave trade?
No,
I don't think she does. Well, the Arab slave trade, she's probably never encountered anything to do with that.
She's never heard of these things because, like I said, Diane Abbott is not the intellectual cutting edge of.
Does she need to be protected?
Right?
Is this what we're saying?
Yeah, but what's she doing here? Right, what she's saying is, hang on a second, look. You may all be victims, but racism is a special, particular thing that happens to black people. Blacks are the arch victims of racism. Ergo slavery. Ergo things that have happened other.
Well, that's how they managed to.
Times. Therefore, we the blacks are the most oppressed.
Well, that's how they managed to redefine racism. That's why it's prejudice, not racism, because racism is power plus prejudice or something, and they have to frame society that white people are always in power at all times.
And up until 10 minutes ago, that was a completely doctrinaire, orthodox, critical race theory point of view. Diane Abbott, from their perspective, has just laid out the facts. She has just laid out, look, the blacks are the most oppressed. Any lighter-skinned peoples are not as oppressed as black people. So she's jostling on the progressive hierarchy.
But she didn't realise down this rosy summer's path that she was walking down, someone had laid a bear trap for her.
Yes. And also she didn't seem to realise that things are different in Britain. Like, even if all of these things held true in South Africa or America, it doesn't matter because we don't live there.
I think lots of people don't realise that things are different in Britain.
Yeah. And I just want to make it very clear, I despise all racial politics. I hate this racist sort of hierarchical victimhood narrative and hierarchy that they come out with. I just think this is all gross. So, but this is what she is doing within her internal logic of the left. And Diane Abbott was instantly suspended. How dare you? How dare you say that the plight of the ginger is equal to the plight of Jews? I mean, so don't get me wrong. I don't think there's any equivalence here at all, obviously. And it seems to be yet another comical thing that Diane Abbott has done. When she's like, on balance, I think Mao did more good than harm. It's like, really?
Labour stands by that statement.
I think who's she sat next to? It was like Michael Heseltine or someone. Some old school conservative politician was just like, what? You know, are you mad? Because obviously he knows what happened under Mao.
Yes.
She has no idea what happened under Mao. But anyway, she got instantly suspended, right? The whip was suspended, pending an investigation into the letter she wrote, suggesting that Jewish people are not subjected to the same racism as other minorities. Well, from the critical race theory point of view, right? To say it's not the same racism is kind of true. Actually, they will argue that there are different kinds of racism.
I mean, if you want to get down into the nitty-gritty details of it, then yes, different peoples, being different peoples, will be treated differently by other different peoples, and that will probably go on a group-to-group basis.
But also, I think the most charitable interpretation of her argument is, what she's saying is the character of the racism against Jewish people is not the same as the character of the racism against black people or against ginger people, right?
Against Scottish people, yes.
Against Scottish people, yes. But the Labour Party instantly closed ranks and ejected Diane Abbott. And I was, wow, this is amazing. A Labour spokesman said, the Labour Party completely condemns these comments, which are deeply offensive and wrong. The Chief Whip has suspended the Labour Whip from Diane Abbott pending an investigation. Among those expressing their outrage was a Tory cabinet minister, Grant Shapps, who I understand is Jewish, and he says, once again, Jewish people have to wake up and see a Labour MP casually spouting hateful anti-Semitism. She didn't exactly go on a tirade, did she?
Once again, this is basically just pointing out these days anything to do with Jews that isn't completely deferential to them is anti-Semitism.
Well, I mean, Diane Abbott definitely put her left foot in her mouth.
I mean, I can understand why Labour would be particularly sensitive to it after all of the controversy they had with it under the Jeremy Corbyn years, especially with Diane Abbott being so closely connected to Jeremy Corbyn. But it's when the Tories and Labour close ranks together.
Yeah, and it just feels very gross, and it puts me in the position of wanting to defend Diane Abbott because, like I said, I don't think she was actually being hateful here. I think what she was trying to do is defend the dignity of black people as victims of the white supremacist society. And like I said, she put her foot in her mouth, but she wasn't saying hateful things about Jews, right? And so it's kind of weird that everyone so transparently jumps on this. The British board, the Board of Deputies of British Jews said Diane Abbott's letter was disgraceful and her apology entirely unconvincing, which we'll get to in a minute. The Jewish Labour movement said it regretfully supports the decision to suspend the whip. Fellow left-winger John Landsman, founder of Momentum, also condemned the remarks. A disgraceful comment by Diane Abbott, for which she has rightly been suspended from the Labour Party. Racism is not a competition. But if you say something about it that's wrong, you will be punished.
Right. As far as I'm concerned, this whole thing is just incredibly performative.
Yeah.
The whole thing is like, do you remember the South Park episode where Britney Spears goes crazy, shaves her head? Well, no, I think in the
was
episode...
that South Park? I thought it was real life.
Yeah, well, that's real life. In South Park, she blows her head off and is still alive, and they all just, swarm around her and take photos until she, ends up killing herself even more. And that it's basically part of some kind of sacrifice that the generations take part in once every few decades so that it can maintain peace and order. This is what I see this as. This is just, let's throw the sacrificial lamb to the slaughter so that all of the party members can make it seem as though we can all come together.
Maybe
in Westminster.
The campaign against anti-Semitism said her suspension must be the first step towards her expulsion from the party. Correct her if you think she's wrong. I can't believe I'm defending Diane Abbott.
She is blasphemed, Carl.
Well, exactly. They're acting as if she's literally done something deeply, and
they're acting like she's
irresolvably
urinated on a Holocaust memorial.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And she's completely, absolutely thrown under the bus, right? For something that until yesterday was not really a very ideologically complex or offensive thing to say, but it's become decided that that is the case. And so Diane Abbott posted this unreserved apology on Twitter. We can get the next one up, right? And just, she's not in any way really trying to defend herself here. She says, I'm writing regarding my letter that was recently published in The Observer. I wish to wholly and unreservedly withdraw my remarks and disassociate myself from them. The errors arose from an initial draft being sent, but there is no excuse. I wish to apologize for any anguish caused. Racism takes many forms, and it is completely undeniable that Jewish people have suffered its monstrous effects, as have Irish people, travellers, and many others. Once again, I would like to apologise publicly for the remarks and any distress caused as a result of them.
Kiss the ring.
Yeah.
That's what this is. Kiss the ring.
Just literally, it's humiliating, right? This is that she has to do this is an abject humiliation, and it just doesn't sit right with me that this needs to be done, because this seems to be like a coalition of people whose identities at some point hinge upon the fact that they have been victimized historically. And I'm not saying that these people haven't been victimized historically, they absolutely have. But for Diane Abbott to say, well, look, you know, that a uniquely awful thing happened to black people, they can all say, well, yeah, a uniquely awful thing happened to all of us. And this game is just awful.
Well,
right?
A lot of these organizations, like these ones that you've just listed off in the previous article, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, the Jewish organizations, these Jewish labor movements, these ones, they absolutely do hold all of their social capital off of the basis of Jewish victimization. Not normal Jewish people don't necessarily do this, but these organizations...
The activists. It's like Black Lives Matter.
Same as the ADL. In the US, these places, they make their capital off of Jewish victimization, and they get all of their power through throwing people to the wolves like this every so often.
But it's the same with like Black Lives Matter and any other of these,
course.
You know, the Stonewall, you know, these like victim identity groups, these particular activists. And I just feel bad for Diane Abbott, because she was just playing the game as she has always played it. And suddenly she tripped on the wrong wire and the whole thing's blown up.
She mentioned the wrong target.
Yeah, I guess, you know. Yeah, ginger people.
Scotland's coming for you, Diane. That's what
the Irish. Back. It's like, what, the Irish? The Irish earn more per capita than the average Brit.
Do they?
Like, way more. Yeah. And I'm just like, okay, so Irish victimhood complex is over because you're all swimming in money and we're not. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I mean,
anyway, who knows?
Yeah.
But anyway, so this I think is a trend in the Labour Party, where they are trying to essentially disavow and excise their most extreme elements. Because, of course, you remember in 2020, Keir Starmer just booted out Jeremy Corbyn. Now, it's like there are lots of complaints about this, but Keir Starmer, because of his controversial remarks on Israel, because, of course, Jeremy Corbyn was framed as an anti-Semite. Now, I don't actually think Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite after looking into it, but I think he probably was soft on anti-Semitism.
Well, he was probably, you mentioned he's made comments about Israel. So he's an anti-Zionist. And
I think he is an anti-Zionist.
And some people correlate the two together, even though there are plenty of anti-Zionist Jews, especially in America, especially in blue state America, for
particularly
instance.
Religious ones as well.
Yes.
But anyway, Starmer, of course, said you're out of the Parliamentary Labour Party and you will not be welcoming back. And recently, Starmer moved to block him from running as a Labour MP in the next general election. A senior Labour source said the party had become unrecognisable since its loss in 2019. Keir Starmer has made it clear that Jeremy Corbyn won't be a Labour candidate at the next general election. Just absolutely. And the interesting thing about this, and the reason it looks like it's actually Keir Starmer targeting Diane Abbott, is because Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott have been two peas in a pod. They had an affair like back in the 60s or something. And
I think it was the 80s.
Was it the 80s, right?
Possibly.
And Diane Abbott was, of course, on Jeremy Corbyn's front bench. And so it looks like Keir Starmer is literally just targeting like this collection of socialist radicals and being like, no, you are gone. You know, we just, you know, any excuse. This, because like I said, this reaction to Diane Abbott just seems really over the top.
Well, they're not Blairites.
Well, they're not Blairites.
They're not Blairites. That's why they've got to go.
And this is why they
toe the line, or at least not the same line that everybody else toes.
Not just that, they're going to sort of muddy the waters and pollute the discourse when the Labour Party want a staggering win in order to continue ruining this country, right? And so Keir Starmer is acting, I think, in a way that Tony Blair would act, and he's just like, and in fact, like Putin, he's been accused of, but more like Stalin, I would say. But just God, you're gone, right? But it's interesting how this is Momentum founder again, John Landsman, who recently said that Keir Starmer was behaving like a Putin of the Labour Party for stopping the former leader from standing as the Labour candidate. So you can see where his sympathies lie. Obviously, he's a Corbynista, because he's of course a radical leftist, but Keir Starmer is just not having any of this. He's governing like an absolute barbarian. And it's quite interesting that Corbyn will end up probably standing against the Labour Party itself in his constituency. So the question will be, has Corbyn's 3.5 decades of service to Islington North garnered him the capital to actually overthrow the power of just wearing a red rosette?
I'm going to say no.
I think he might do it, actually.
I think most people vote according to teams.
Sure, but I think that there's also an element of sort of political loyalty there.
Perhaps if he's got to know...
I think Diane Abbott might be able to win hers.
If he's got to know his constituents personally...
He probably has.
Then I would imagine he has a better chance. But I do believe that a lot of people vote purely on team basis.
Sure, but I think that in these sort of old constituencies, where they've been there for decades, I think a lot of it will be personal loyalty. So, I mean,
we'll see.
There's probably a large amount of patronage there. So we'll see, I guess. But yeah, no, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is in the same position here. And so if you go to radical left-wingers, they view this sort of thing as a crackdown. And I think it's understandable. I think that is what's happening. And I think Keir Starmer, despite having the visage of an insanely boring 1990s conservative politician, is actually a ruthless villain behind the scenes, at least as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, as far as they're concerned, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm not a Blairite. I don't support the Blairites. You don't either, as you just said. But if you want a Blairite party, then you can't have dissent within the ranks. So this is actually very clever and very, very standard politicking as far as Keir Starmer is concerned.
It's not standard. That's the thing. It's quite ruthless, actually. Like his predecessor.
Well, before everybody went soft, everybody was a bit more ruthless and would do this sort of thing.
I don't know. I think that prior to now, the Labour Party was pitched as a broader tent for socialists and communists, right? Which is why the Communist Party ended up endorsing the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. But Starmer is just not having any of this. And I think this is directly under advice from Tony Blair, where it's just like, no, just get rid of them. Just cut them out. Because, I mean, he purged a bunch of the administration in the Labour Party as well, because they were obviously filled with communists and they'd been, operating under Corbyn's auspices.
I mean, if I got in charge of Labour, that's the first thing that I would do.
Yeah, me too. And so it's interesting how they frame this here, right? So the Labour leader believes his party can only regain public confidence by ditching ideological opposition for constructive engagement with the government, as in becoming Her Majesty's or His Majesty's loyal opposition. Because that's the point that was made previously, that Corbyn had turned the Labour Party into like a left-wing protest movement. And it's like, yeah, but nobody wants that to govern. And so Keir Starmer is actually doing the politically sensible thing here. He's doing it quite ruthlessly. But anyway, let's move into the hierarchy of racism. Because, of course, when the radical left-wingers are getting absolutely slammed, Ash Sarkar has to pop up out of the water and be like, well, hang on a second, my hierarchy of racism. And that's actually what she's talking about here. She says Diane Abbott's letter was wrong, no doubt about it. And it's like, well, actually, there is definitely a left-wing argument that can be made that actually Diane Abbott's letter isn't necessarily wrong. Or, if Diane Abbott's letter is wrong, what you essentially have to admit from the left-wing framework is that Irish gingers and Jews are not white, right? So, if you can be racist against them. So, what we're doing here is literally accepting that the entire framework of critical race theory is nonsense, and we're creating a kind of British version of critical race theory, which, of course, is going to be terrible. But she says, journalists and indeed the Labour Party, however, are proving that there is such a thing as a hierarchy of racism by erasing what she said about the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community. Well, she did say that you couldn't be racist to them because they're white.
Well, I believe that, I can't tell exactly what she means by this, but I think she means that, doesn't Ash Sarkar actually believe that there is a hierarchy of racism anyway?
Oh yeah, this is what she's arguing.
Okay.
She's proving there is such a thing as a hierarchy of racism. And it's like, yes, and what she was trying to do by saying that only black people could be the victims of racism and everyone else was a victim of prejudice was actually situate herself at the top of that hierarchy. So Diane Abbott was trying to use the hierarchy of racism and she got absolutely smashed.
Ash dives in and goes, no, I'm at the top. No.
No. Well, she would probably like
she
that. She probably
would.
But she is right that Diane Abbott is observing that and was smashed by the hierarchy of racism. So even in the ultimate egalitarian movements, they're still plagued by hierarchies, right? But she says the reason the stuff about the GRT, the Traveller community, is being erased is because hatred against them is considered socially acceptable, even common sense. We're watching the hierarchy of racism in real time. It's like, sounds like you want to expand racism equality to all of these groups, right? Everyone should be joking. It's the way she's framed it. But she says in the next one, racism impacts groups in different ways, which, again, I don't think she's wrong about here, especially from an orthodox left-wing position, right? Black and Asian people are targeted more than white people in stop and searches, but then hotels, pubs, and cafes refuse to serve people like Gypsy, Roma, and Traveller community. That's certainly racism. Sometimes I like to play a game called Who Would I Swap Places With in This Society? My life is impacted with racism, sure, but I'd probably have a worse time of it because of profiling if I was a young black guy in London. I'd have a harder time of it in many ways if I was GRT. Sometimes anti-racist discourse feels like a competition for visibility. And this marginalized, and the exercise of imagining your life, how your life would be different if you were from a different marginalized community, can be a useful corrective to the oppression Olympics. So what she's saying, she wants everyone to have equal amounts of racism applied to them.
Well, I mean, the main thing that I'm missing from all of this analysis, which is absolutely no surprise whatsoever, are trends of behavior that exist within each of these groups, which influences the way that people treat them and the way that they're treated under the law by police and other such things. Because the fact of the matter is, it can be sad that, yes, a law-abiding young black man in London probably will get stopped and searched by the police more often than a law-abiding young white man in London. Yeah. The problem is that there are drill gangs in Brixton and other areas of London.
Literally stabbing themselves in the street. Stabbing
each other in the street, which causes the police to have to take these measures.
Yeah.
And she's just ignoring all of that, which is, to me, the left-wing position.
But what I love about this is that the Labour Party has been like, no, you absolutely can be racist to Jews and Gypsies and Irish and Gingers. We are extending the remit of racism to all of these groups. It's like, really? Do they really want to have racism extended to them? Yeah. Like, nobody asked them, right?
Don't worry, guys. We've got some slurs coming your way.
So this is what she's done. Yeah, no. It's obvious that Jewish, Gypsy, Roma, and Traveller people experience racism. Right, okay. So, and the fact that the latter is tolerated and encouraged amongst both major parties. So what, does she want to encourage tolerance of racism further? I mean, I thought if we were retreating racism, surely that'd be a good, I'm joking. But go to the next one. She says, unfortunately, this is what some people use the very serious and very real problem of anti-Semitism for, to silence people of color who are talking about racism. And now we're back on the game. We're back on the stack. It's like, okay. And in their own logic, right, Ash is actually not wrong here. But then I actually think that Diane Abbott has kind of been mistreated here. But what she was doing is essentially an anti-racist power play, saying, no, the blacks are the real victims of racism, and therefore I'm at the top and the rest of you don't get racism. It was just remarkable to watch this sort of scale of events in real time. This is left-wing politics for you, by the way.
Well, this is just politicking done in public instead of behind closed doors.
This is left-wing politicking. I'm not a left-winger. I don't support any of this ideology, and so none of these questions or concerns or like hierarchical jostlings would come up in my world.
Well, once again, from what I can see, this is politicking done in public, but because it's left-wing, they have to use the racial arguments to justify the whole thing.
Yeah. But I just thought it was fascinating. So you could see it exposes the internal logic of anti-racist politics and the way that there's just literally, look, we're going to make it so everyone is a victim of racism at the end of it. It's like, is this all we have to talk about, is it? Apparently so.
We hope you enjoyed that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. If you enjoyed, you can go and get the full podcast for free on our website. And also you can pay us as little as £5 a month to get access to all of our premium content, such as the Contemplation series, this episode where Josh discusses with Stelios whether or not cities are having an impact on our psychology and politics. If you want to find out all of the content that we're putting out, you can follow us at lotuseaters_com on Twitter and Getter. Until next time, goodbye.